Welcome to the Digital Analytics Power Hour. Michael, Mo, Tim, and the occasional guest discussing analytics issues of the day, and periodically using explicit language while doing so. Find them on the web at analyticshour.io and on Twitter at analyticshour. And now, the Digital Analytics Power Hour.
Hi everyone, this is the Digital Analytics Power Hour, and this is episode 154. Okay, grab your popcorn, and since we all work from home right now, you're probably already in your comfy trousers. It's movie night at the Digital Analytics Power Hour, but first, make sure to go to iTunes and give us a rating and review. It helps the algorithm. Also, follow us on Twitter at Analytics Hour, because that's good for the algorithm too. In addition, join our LinkedIn group. We don't actually know what that means, but I'm sure it helps something. We are discussing the recent film, The Social Dilemma, that came out a couple months ago on Netflix. Something we're trying out here at the Power Hour, so hence the joke about all of our social channels. Okay, Mo Kiss, Head of Marketing Analytics at Canva. You are my co-host. Welcome.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Great to talk to you. Also discussing the film is Tim Wilson, Senior Director of Analytics at Search Discovery.
And you can like that or retweet it.
You can smash that subscribe button.
Smash that subscribe button.
So if we can get 10,000 likes on this episode, we'll do a giveaway of a t-shirt or something. That's what the YouTubers say, right? All right. And I'm going to say something. I am Michael Helbling, the founder of Stacked Analytics. Okay. Who wants to go first in denouncing social media? I mean, discussing the social dilemma. So I thought to kick us off, Tim, we elected you to give everybody sort of an overview of the film just to get us started, and then we can get into some of the topics and deeper discussion.
Just based on my gift for concision, that would be the most expedient way to get through that. So hopefully many people have watched it, because it did kind of organically come about. But for anyone who didn't, just the structure is kind of interesting. It is a combination of interviews and kind of classic documentary style, but it's former product managers and engineers and executives from a whole range of social media platforms, kind of centered around one of the main co-founders, or the main co-founder, Tristan Harris of the Center for Humane Tech, who used to be at Google. So that's kind of the exploring the algorithms within social media, asking them a lot of questions in kind of that style. But then that's interspersed with kind of a fictionalized family account of a husband and wife and 3 kids. And basically there's like the one older sibling who seems to be like the voice of reason, has more of a clue than her parents or her younger siblings. And then the 2 younger siblings, the one is like a high school teenager. The other one, I think she's maybe like middle school aged, and both of their sort of experiences with social media and kind of how things go awry. So it's pretty well done. It's probably, I don't know, 2/3 of it is to 3/4 is kind of the interviews, trying to sort of stitch together the evils of social media. Although I would say Framed is called out that some of those are unintentional evils, but all of the various downsides of social media, but then tries to kind of make it real with this family. And then it's maybe the third component is it's got Vincent Kartheiser. I don't know the actor's name. They basically have the AI represented as 3 different people. So it kind of gets into the AI, which I would say is one of the areas I had a little bit of a beef with. But that's also part of the kind of fictionalizing piece. So, but it basically tells this narrative of we are doomed thanks to the algorithm.
I did watch that movie and become very interested in finding out more about what is extreme centrism. So, at least that is something. Sorry.
I think one of the things, I have a friend actually who's incredibly passionate about this topic. And so for me, it was actually really interesting watching it, because it's a topic I've actually been talking about for probably a year now with this good friend. She actually went to the Center for Humane Technology and brought back this concept of humane tech dinners.
We're not naming this friend. Can we say this friend might have not been allowed to talk about this topic publicly and therefore will remain?
She's a very dear friend.
I wasn't going to reveal the gender, but if you want to narrow it down to half the population, then
let's just remember that anything that Mo discusses on the Digital Analytics Power Hour podcast or its associated conference topics are not necessarily the views of her employer. Okay, there you go.
Or her friends.
Or my friends.
Or her friends' employers.
But one of the things that we did talk about quite a bit was like actually getting momentum behind people caring about this problem, about what are the negative sides of technology and what is it doing to our society, to our relationships. The movie did a very good job of making this relatable and understandable to like the mass population. And ultimately, like, there's so many people who participate in the movie because that was the real aim of it, is like, this is a discussion that has been happening within the tech industry and hasn't been getting as much traction as it should because it doesn't have the buy-in from the wider population. And I do think this was a way to make it relatable. I'll get into the pros and cons of the relatableness, but that's another thing.
I mean, the reality is I've got an aunt who I adore her. We don't have a lot of like regular communication, but you know, she actually emailed me and said, "Hey, my group of friends have watched this. We're really concerned." So, I mean, I think it definitely did that. And then she was like, "You kind of are in that space. Have you seen it? What's kind of your take on it?" So I definitely think partly between Netflix as a distribution platform, frankly, partly is Netflix's algorithm bubbling it up. And I don't know how much is the algorithm and how much is Netflix saying this is one we want to, you know, get behind a little bit. Facebook, of course, came out and was like, you know, trashed Netflix for doing this, which was kind of an interesting, you know, side dynamic. But yeah, that's a great point.
Well, it's interesting. And as a matter of principle, I did not watch the recommended next movie that Netflix thought I should watch after watching the special. I was like, you're not the boss of me. I mean, it does look interesting, but I'm not going to watch it. It's very interesting because I think one dynamic that came out in a lot of the discussions, and there's a number of interviews with sort of these people who help build these companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and other companies, is that, you know, they didn't start out with any malice or intent, really. And it was pretty clear. Like they didn't begin with sort of this intensity of like, let's go capture people's interest and like really make them dependent on us or maximize our gains at their expense. But they all, at least the people that were interviewed in this film, have all come to realize that the end result of their pursuit, and they specifically called out growth hacking, and I just want to put that on the record. Growth hacking, bad. Okay, good. Moving on. No need to discuss that more. But the end of that pursuit was like where we're ending up, which is this intense manipulation, not just of people's like habits on the platform, but even their neuroscientific psychology or whatever, brain levels, dopamine, that kind of stuff. And it seems like there's two parts of this that seem to stand out to me. And I don't know if I'm diving into the philosophical side of it too quickly, but like the first is sort of the responsibility of the company. And the second is the agency of the individual, right? So in other words, like I have a cell phone, and they made a lot of like, you know, the cell phone figured heavily in the movie, which it should, because it's a pretty ubiquitous device in at least the Western or the developed world. But I have to make choices about my own cell phone usage. I'm certainly not being helped by these companies, and that they're really trying to suck me in and get me to like, you know, the word doom scrolling is a word I learned during the pandemic, and it's pretty apt sometimes. You just start going through like like Twitter and Reddit, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it is, and you're just sort of like, it's 2:30 in the morning, I should be in bed. But it's sort of like, yeah, how much of that do I own and how much of that's on them? And that part is what's really hard for me, like, to figure out.
That is that's a slippery slope. I mean, because you're essentially saying that it's going to be hard. I mean, that is, if you take it to the extreme, the person who blames the alcoholic for alcoholism, the person who blames the drug user for drug use, right? And it's the kid, by the way.
Or you know, blames McDonald's for obesity, and I mean, there's just all these.
But I do think there is some responsibility on companies. Well, not some, but a big part of it. And to be honest, it is the culture of growth hacking, whatever you want to call it, where The startup culture, or they're not really startups anymore, they're scale-ups or now huge businesses. They become obsessed with growth, and they motivate their employees for deeper engagement, more users, and that, I think, is the crux of it, is yes, maybe there was an ill intent, but if you're always incentivizing your employees to increase those metrics, then they're going to do whatever they can to increase those metrics.
So I just want to clarify that I said you're heading down a slippery slope of blaming the person with the addiction, and you said that's like blaming McDonald's, and it's exactly the opposite of that.
No, I'm saying there's lots of different ways of, I'm agreeing with you and providing a counter. There's all kinds of different ways of looking at this. I agree. When someone has got their brain so wrapped around stimulus and response such that they can't really put their phone, that is an addiction. And that's different than making a choice. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really explain the details of that, but I know there is a difference. And that's the thing, is to the same extent, we all kind of live, well, none of us lived. Tim, you lived through the cigarette companies basically lying to the public. Tim knows all about that. No, I'm just kidding. Trying to make an old guy joke. Anyways, but it's sort of happening again in a certain sense. In that, but the weird thing is it didn't start with them doing it. But Mo, you made a good point. It was sort of we've got to grow super fast. We got to scale. And then they arrive at these really unintended outcomes. And as a society, we're not ready.
But back up to how they got to that, right? Because that's, the point was made. I think it was actually the Pinterest former president, Tim Kendall, called out that when they got into this, they weren't really sure how they were going to make money. Yeah. And what happened is that advertising not just became a good way to make money, it is such a dominant.
It is the way.
It's not we're going to have a balanced portfolio. We're going to sell some of this, and we're going to make some money this way, and we're going to do some advertising, and we're going to have some memberships. It became such a no-brainer, so lucrative that, and by then they're public. And once they're public and they've got to be looking out for the investors, it just says, well, we kind of have to do more of that. And then the leap from that is, well, how do we keep growing? Because we're public and we have to keep growing. And the only way we're going to grow at scale is to drive more of this. Well, okay. And I did love the way they broke down their AI. I liked and did not like aspects of how they represented the AI, but when they broke it down into, we've got to get more people, which you get just by generally through referrals, people getting peer pressure to be on, getting over the tipping point to where you get critical mass. So, but you gotta drive more people. You've got to keep them on as long as possible. That's more impressions that you can sell. And then you have to sell them ads that are effective. And that when you do your supervised learning algorithm, basically to say, this is what we need to do. And this makes perfect sense on an Excel spreadsheet. If we do more of this, we get more of this, and everybody wins. And that's where it's everybody except for the kids who are getting fucked up and the adults who are getting, fucked up by it.
I had a moment watching it where I actually was on my phone scrolling, and I was like, whoa, and dropped my phone and had this you're doing it right now. You're watching it and you're doing it right now. Where
you become hyper aware.
Yeah, this tiny second where you're not interested in what you're doing. So I'll turn to my phone. And I've tried to institute tech-free nights in my house. They have been
just leveled up on Candy Crush. Oh, no. Oh, sorry.
Huh? What was that? I was just checking my phone.
Sorry.
But yeah, they have been tech-free nights in our house have been a total failure. Total failure.
I've got a niece who, and this was several years ago. I mean, she's about to graduate from college, but when she was in high school, which wasn't, so not that long ago, her friends would do when they went out together to a meal, they would all put their phones in the middle of the table, which I know is kind of a common thing. She's the only teenager I have personal experience with, but that took a collective action. We're all going to not do this, which is in the film. It's well, that's great if you're all your buddies who you're hanging out with anyway, your FOMO is not going to be bad, but put me with my, my parents. And it's I'm pretty sure there's something else going on.
But that's I need two small anecdotes. Number one, I now have to lecture my mother about this. It's actually gone the other way, where she will answer the phone. She'll look at text messages during dinner. I don't look at my phone during meals. If I'm with someone, I'm with someone. The other family member who's a total pain in my ass is one Lee Sensi, because we play that game where we put our phones in the middle of the table, and it's like, okay, whoever gets their phone first has to pick up the bill. And Lil's like, Lee is like, fuck it, I'll pay for it because I'd rather have my phone. And I'm like, that defeats the whole purpose of this exercise.
Now, I feel like I have to come to Lee's defense, but I don't know.
Why?
I don't know. Hey, stay strong out there, Lee. I don't know. Maybe get off your phone sometimes. But
I had my mother got wind of the exchange I had with my aunt and asked me to forward the email to her. And my mother has not actually watched the film. So I'm like, okay, there's a little bit of, when you get into kind of the retweeting without actually clicking through on the link, I'm like, you're kind of exhibiting a little bit of the problem they allude to of sharing without knowing, without the independent thought. She's also my example of watching polarization politically. To her credit, in the last month or so leading up to the election, she started taking in somewhat active effort to try to understand other perspectives. But I mean, it is one where and I think this is part of Facebook's objection. They're like, we did not create political polarization. They're like, that already existed. And there is that kind of famous US kind of watching the parties kind of drift apart. It's like, yeah, you did. But at the same time, like, you literally are dropping a feedback loop. Like you're
exacerbating the problem significantly.
You're exacerbating the problem, and you're just like accelerating.
It's like, oh, the bridge was already like vibrating, but you just created a perfect harmonic for it to massively accelerate the vibrations.
What did you guys think of the way that the algorithm was kind of explained? Because it was kind of personified where they were. Okay. But that really bothered me.
I had such serious issues with it because I feel like we're people who know exactly what this movie is talking about, right? But for the layperson, which is 99% of people who are watching this, I don't think they would have understand the symbolism of it being an algorithm. They would have thought that there is a literal engineer at this company that is targeting them as an individual and not looking to basically modify or enhance behavior of aggregated groups based on their behavior. And so I actually felt like this real visceral reaction to how they explained or how they visualized the algorithm, because I felt it could be really misleading, particularly from like that really individual focus.
Yeah.
I actually missed I didn't catch it the first time. The second time I watched it is prepping for this show. The AI does at one point actually say, oh, we're losing him. If we do this, there's a 62% probability that'll re-engage. And the other AI says, that's not good enough. What else do we have? And I was like, okay, there's a nod to the probabilistic world of models. But for that exact same reason, that's where I get worried that the masses, that anybody who walks away, which many people will, that every company that has data and has machine learning going on has this identified human idea, and it's a nuanced thing to try to explain, that trying to figure out the next best action for an individual is still different from this, like, oh, this guy is about to get up and walk downstairs to the kitchen, so let's put this much delayed notification on his phone. I'm like, that's not helpful, even though it makes for drama.
Yeah, I guess I didn't sit back and think like about it the way you just described, Mo, and so it didn't particularly bother me, but I can definitely see where you're coming from now. I just was like, they were trying to make the concept of AI like understandable. But so the interesting thing is, it's like, and again, I'm going back to that same guy you were talking about before, Tim Kendall. He's basically like, at Facebook, we had users, engagement, and revenue, and we basically had them on dials. So we want more of this, we just have a dial. And they even talked about how, like, let's set up dials in Mark Zuckerberg's office. We need more people in Korea today. that dial. The thing I was thinking about is, so ad-driven businesses in information and entertainment have been around since radio started, maybe even before that, because maybe we could even make a case for newspapers. And like radio programs and television, broadcast television, are ad-driven, and they do research and find out sort of like how many ads can we put between the show would get you to stick around and not leave to another program, right? Or how do we create shows that make you want to watch more television? How do we make our Thursday night lineup make you watch more TV? And so in a certain sense, it's sort of like the thing that seems to be scaling here, it massively scaling, is the precision to which the AI is able to go after you as an individual and tune all of these billions of opportunities for engagement and content specifically to you to draw that out even more. Whereas we used to have to target demographics and things like that. Sort of like, okay, what are we going to put on after Seinfeld? Oh, let's put on this. We know everyone's going to watch Seinfeld, so let's use that to give a bump to this show and, plan out. Like, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, you'd look at like, certain nights of the week on NBC was like the comedy night, and other nights were other shows or whatever. I don't know. But it's not a new concept is what I'm saying. It's just that the computer algorithms we've developed have allowed us to just solve the problem at scale so much more effectively.
But if you had to apply it, the thing is because you can do hyper focused, you can like when they talk about, they're just trying to find which rabbit hole they can take you down. So that gives you this, and it is marketers. We talk about this one-to-one bullshit all the time. I want to make stuff that's relevant. And then you see somebody who's not in marketing says, no, you're trying to manipulate me. The marketer sees it as we tell ourselves the story. We're giving you something that is relevant content. But why do we want to give you relevant content? Because we want to get you to click on what we have put in front of you to drive this action and a purchase. So yeah, marketing is doing the same thing, nowhere near as effectively. Although I think that's what I do get worried based on the clients I work with are a million years away from what Facebook is doing. Yeah. And that's not just because Facebook is smarter. Facebook is a walled garden with an obscene amount of data, and they're still not doing what was kind of metaphorically sort of represented. Not that we're not kind of getting to that towards that point, but that's why all the locking down, preventing the data that marketers have and can use. It's like, well, maybe this does get back to maybe a little bit more mass appeal. Maybe now you've got Schitt's Creek out there appealing to, it's got to hit enough broad people that you get a few people to be like, oh, we can have these kind of gender fluid relationships and maybe that's okay. If this was all hyper targeted, there would be a ton of people who would never get drawn in to a sitcom that is a little different, a little quirky, and may actually round out their worldview a little bit. I think that's because it focuses worldviews and to the exclusion of everything else, which I think that's where it's different from when you had 3 channels.
See, that the ads bit didn't stick with me, I think, the same way it has with both of you. And like, obviously I work in marketing analytics, so maybe I'm just, I don't know, in my bubble, but it wasn't something that I consciously thought a lot about. Like I was much more drawn on the side of like the dopamine hits of the like buttons. And like, I think the way that the younger sister in the family, particularly it like affected her self-confidence, I thought they actually did an amazing job of demonstrating that. And it made my heart hurt for all of our children and our future children. Like, what is going to be like, I'm okay with getting a car ad if I've been car shopping, right? But the idea that my entire self-worth could be tied up to how many people like a particular post, like that left me really upset.
Yeah. So that was probably the hardest hitting part of the movie for me too. Just, I've got 2 kids, 14 and 12. And luckily they're both boys and they couldn't care less about social media so far, but that's going to change, right? It's going to change. And as a parent, I don't know that I know how to do this. And Tim can tell me I'm wrong because he's better at this, but I recognized pretty early on in having kids that there's a whole new competency that was required of me as a parent that my parents never had to grapple with, which was how does digital play a role in our lives? Like how do we manage screens and screen time, and what's our perspective on that? How old should our kids be? Like when you were young, like there's sort of like, what age are you allowed to start dating? And that's still a question, I guess. It doesn't seem like people date anymore. I don't know what's going on.
Well, and Michael, you're not allowed to date once you've been married for a decade.
I mean, Maria and I go on dates. Is that allowed? Is that
like you're allowed to go on a date with your wife?
Oh, okay, that's good. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. But the next question is sort of like, how old should my kids be before I get them their first cell phone? And I would say in their social group right now, they are the ones without the cell phones. Like most of their friends have them, but I'm kind of like, I'm going to hold on for as long as possible. And then watching that in the social network, I was like, that's why I'm holding off right there. Middle school sucks.
All of the people they interviewed said they won't give their kids access to social media and phones, which
at the end of the movie.
Well, so one, they have an enormous amount of, somewhat easier said than done. And having had children with mental health issues, it is putting kind of an impossible burden on the parents when you say, oh, you're going to be the one who is going to, in absolute terms, sounds great on the whiteboard. We're not going to let them have, does actually mean, and I'm not saying you want to hold off as long as possible, but recognize that is putting a degree of, you're fighting kind of the most challenging time in a social experience for the kids, and you're kind of hampering them on that. I mean, my oldest went through, he's a guy. 2, he could give 2 shits about anybody's opinion, never got sucked in. I'm like, yeah, piece of cake. Well, guess what? That sort of set unreal expectations for the others. But I would say, at the same time, we do have, as they talk about kind of the increases of mental health, causality is a tough thing. We don't really know what is causing the increases in all of these. But it's a similar sort of thing that if you are starting to have some depression issues, social media is not going to help. If you're on the autism spectrum, you're going to look like an electronics. There's a good chance you're going to look like you're addicted to electronics very quickly. And the question is where it's, again, you're fighting chemicals in the brain when you say, oh, we're just going to not do this, which I think the movie, to bring it back to that, this older sibling who's like, aren't you going to go to soccer practice? Aren't you going to do X? Aren't you going to do Y? She tries. That's kind of the sense with parenting that you can have that battle and you can rip that cell phone away, but it's not going to end, the mom doing the right thing. We're just going to lock this up and try to have dinner. Well, you just took somebody off of their drug cold turkey with no warning, and how'd that work out, for you?
No. And trust me, in our house, there are many conversations about screens and screen time and usage and those kinds of things that don't go well because frankly, we're not great at it. And then, I spend all my time working on a computer and on a phone and those kinds of things. So Maria's like, well, they mimic you. And then I play video games on top of that. And it's like, well, then they're going to want to play video games any chance they get. And I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with video games.
and the video games, and I'm not a gamer, but having the kid, that's how my oldest for years, like, as he and his friends scattered to college, they're playing a game and they're hanging out, and it's a activity while they're hanging out. So where do you get between that and the other kid who's playing a video game and talking to people, but he doesn't know them. He doesn't have a real connection.
Oh.
Yeah.
And he'll point to that and say, and I think, Mo, you were saying earlier, like that's what's bothering you more than the advertising, but that's what the movie's making the point. They're completely interlinked. When you have an algorithm trained to maximize one, it's going to maximize the other.
And I think that's the thing in the peer group setting, where the peer group is now not defined by sort of like community constraints. So like if Sally says something mean about me, I can at least go to her mom, or I could go talk to the school or something like that, where sort of like the bounds of those things. And again, like lots of different pictures of that around the world. So I'm approaching that from a pretty Western white guy point of view of like living in the burbs and whatnot. So there's lots of different ways to kind of look at that. So I want to be sensitive to it. But at the same time, the internet kind of opens the door to sort of a bunch of other people who are coming in sideways who may or may not have any relationship or ability for you to interact and be like, that was not kind what you just said. You need to apologize, because that's not going to happen on. So all you get is the negativity. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, and so if you're out there, like the number one profession apparently for kids now, or was a couple of years ago, was to be a YouTuber. And yet talk to any YouTuber and they'll be like, the hate in the comments, it just wears you down. It just wears you down. I had to step away from YouTube. I was getting so depressed by all the angry comments and the hate.
So whose responsibility is this? I feel like the companies do have some responsibility. And like the truth is, we're talking about algorithms, but algorithms can also be used for good. They can find hate speech and I don't know, a bunch of other awful things that appear online. Oh my God, I would never want to be a moderator. That would be the world's most awful job in the entire world.
Oh,
but,
well, those people have had, I mean, Facebook's panel of people, I remember, that was like not good for your mental health.
But algorithms can be used to do that. But the thing that I'm finding really frustrating is like the algorithms that are all about how do we get people to engage more? How do we get people to see more ads seem to be killing it. But the ones that when it comes to hate speech or other nefarious activity, the companies are all saying it's really hard to do. This is too hard. So like, to me, that just doesn't sit, they don't sit together. Well,
and I'm somewhat cynical about it too, because the companies that are doing the most out there, like Facebook, and Facebook published that response right to the movie, Tim, that you mentioned already. And they're like, well, we're doing this and we're doing this. And my reaction to that is, why didn't you design the system for that? You were too focused on like how much you could get. And isn't it great that now all of a sudden now that you've like scorched the earth, you care about climate change. It's sort of like that kind of thing. It's like, well, we'll stop burning the rainforest just as soon as we get all of our economic goals met. And it's like, that's not going to cut it. And I feel like it's pinpointing for me, and I don't know to what extent this is part of American culture or whatever, but this idea of like scaling growth as fast as possible versus sustaining growth in a meaningful way, right? So a sustainable company versus a scaling company is sort of this thing I've been kind of like thinking about, because it's sort of, I feel like as we move forward with technology and where we're headed with technology, and I always use the Neuralink company as an example, where they're trying to create an implant that goes right in your brain that pumps information in and out. Like, if we don't think about privacy and neuropsychology and those kinds of things before we do anything with that, what are we going to do to ourselves? What are we going to do to humanity that we don't ever intend to? And we're sorry later. And we're going to do our best, to your point, Mo, like, oh, it's super hard for us to like mitigate this hate speech and whatnot. And people are going to find each other on here and make these negative communities, and we can't shut them all down, or, do these political things and we can't get to everything. And so disinformation and fake news, proliferate. It's kind of like, well, then maybe you should have thought of that before you started. Like, sort of think through the problem.
Yeah, but I agree, but I don't agree. Like, you're putting the responsibility back on the technologist who's sitting in the company. And I actually had a conversation with one of my analysts the other day who has been doing this really amazing piece of research on like, what's the right metrics to measure engagement? So that's a pretty common like startup scale up question. And I said to him, I was like, the next question though that needs to come after that is more engagement a better thing for our users? Are we going to have happier users? Are they going to get more value out of our product? Because we think that them coming back more often, or them creating more designs, or whatever it is, like more engagement is good, but is it actually good for the user? And I remember having this conversation at the Iconic all the time as well, where particularly male users would come twice a year. They would do a big shop. They'd buy 4 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, 4 pairs of jocks, 2 socks, and they'd come back twice a year. And everyone's like, great, but so how do we increase their frequency? Like, we need them to come back more often. And I'm like, why? If they come twice a year and buy everything they need and they are perfectly happy and have had a great experience and tell everyone how much they love our company, why do we need to get them from coming twice a year to coming 4 times a year? But the point is that conversation is then down to the people in the company. It's not even at the leadership level. You're then putting that responsibility on every single person who's building tech and asking them to lead that conversation for their companies, which, yes, I think there's a role in that. But I also think that some of this needs to be coming from the leadership of these companies as well.
I think there's a degree of, if not us, then who, but I also think the slippery slope. I just went and looked. Like I joined Twitter 13 years ago, a little over 13 years ago. And I basically met Michelle Kiss through Twitter, right? I mean, there was not to be the old grump pining for older times, but I still have quick little exchanges with, Doug Hall in the UK. Like there is, even on Facebook, there are friends from high school. There is the positive part. If you ask me to define what do I want versus what do I not want? And it does. It's like, well, that goes into what I personally feel. It goes into my personal mood at the time. Am I looking for a pick me up? Am I looking for somebody who agrees with me? Am I looking for somebody I haven't heard from in a long time? I don't think it's impossible, but I think it is easy to sort of see how the snowball happened. And it was literally like, and that's the last horse out. We better get those barn doors closed now, and it's like, I do believe that they were starting with we can do this. It's a good thing. We'll make money in one of these few ways. And then they're very, very complex systems. And even with your example of like a retailer, it's like, well, if we don't get them to come here, what's going to keep one of our competitors from getting to them first? And then we're going to lose them entirely. And by the time they don't come back. So it is this competition for attention, and everybody just wants more attention. And unfortunately, there's just no good way to say, ugh, that's terrible.
But Tristan.
Yeah.
I mean, even like the heartbreaking example that he goes through of where he creates this amazing memo internally at Google and everyone's like, oh, wow, this is groundbreaking. And then nothing happens. Like, I get that the problem has evolved beyond what the initial intentions were. But it's like, what's the circuit breaker now? Because now, like, we're getting into really, like, snowball dangerous territory. It's rolling downhill so fast no one can catch up to it. What is the thing that gets people to care about this now?
Well, I think, the thing we're kind of describing is sort of like, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will, and I'll lose my place in the market. So then markets tend to, for the good of the consumer, be regulated by some function, right? So I think that's the place of where regulation and legislation come in, right?
Oh.
I'm just saying, like, that's kind of the way I look at it. It's sort of like Facebook didn't stop at a certain boundary because there was no boundary, and they just kept going and going, and nobody told them, yeah, you need to bring that in. And they go before Congress and they're like, we don't sell anybody's data. Well, no, you don't sell it. You just use it for yourselves. What you sell is advertising off of that data, right? And so it's difficult because, like, in the US anyways, our politicians, well, frankly, are just a huge waste of everyone's time most of the time. And so, like, it's sort of like, it's hard not to feel a little defeated. But at the same time, I do believe that's the proper equation in my head anyways, philosophically, is like, there are rules and then everybody has to play by those rules. And then that creates then the sustainability of the interrelationship between the consumer, the company, and kind of the state of play. And then people who leave that playing field then should be tracked down and punished, right? But to create the playing field, the problem I see right now is that the companies that created the problem would like to be the ones to define the playing field, and that's not okay to me. I don't
think they want to define the playing field. You look at Zuckerberg. He doesn't want to have to set rules and regulations for his company because then he'll be held responsible for them. He wants someone else to make the rules and regulations. He just wants to be able to influence them.
Well, they want to put a finger on the scale.
The thing that's frustrating me is that the companies are now getting so big that if they don't like the decision the government's making, they're like, okay, we'll pull out of this country, we'll pull out of this state. And then all of the users are like, actually, we really want Uber to be able to drive cars here. It's really convenient. Or like, we want to be able to use Facebook because that's how I talk to my aunt in England. And so the companies themselves have been able to become these really powerful lobby groups, essentially, which means that, yes, I agree. Like, I do believe that legislation can play a big part in this, but it also becomes impossible to legislate some of these companies that are so powerful.
Yeah.
Well, but the thing is the wheel of the legislation moves slowly anywhere. And obviously I've got a more experience or visibility in the US, but right. It was one, there are the laughable hearings where you've got these ancient white dudes asking about the tubes
and white ladies. Come on. There's some women in the Senate.
Yeah, there are.
And they ask bad questions too.
Somewhat, but maybe not. But
anyway,
but what happens is that, and that's kind of right now in the U.S. There's the Communications Decency Act, which was 1996, and there's this Section 230, which was no provider or user of an interactive computer service will be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Basically, that got passed and then interpreted as Facebook, Twitter, not responsible for what gets shared. And all of a sudden now it's like, wait a minute, we need to revisit and reinterpret that. The kicker is that, again, the horses are out of the barn. If anyone says this needs to be done, we have such polarization that whoever says this needs to be done, there is a default. Yeah. Well, that must be for you to get one up on me, and I'm going to fight it. So there are these comical things where you've got total adversaries, both opposed to Facebook for completely different reasons, which is like, well, that's great. That means they can work together. Like, no, because their two solutions are going to be completely opposite because it's gamesmanship. So I don't know. That's the regulatory, until there is some degree of taking the temperature down, some degree of who is a recognized body. I honestly do think it could be still a privately or could be nonprofit that says we are, just like Mozilla has said, we're going to, we're here not to be driven by the almighty dollar. Some organization that says we aren't trying to make money. We're not trying to do this. We're funded well enough. We can get scale and get critical mass. The challenging part is they've got to kind of build that trust out and get to a level of scale with people who fundamentally don't agree with each other, but then agree that third party has everyone, the world's best interest at heart. And I don't see that happening.
I wonder if that's why the movie was called The Social Dilemma.
Oh,
because it's sort of like, you make a really good point, which is, one side picks like a path and the other side, politically anyways, is like, even if that makes sense and aligns with my interest, I'm on principle going to just disagree with it and call you evil because that's what we do now.
I think New Zealand can figure it out, and then everybody else can just slowly want to be like New Zealand. It'll be just like the pandemic.
Yeah. I struggle with like those comparisons, like, cause everybody's like, well, Norway does it. It's like, yeah, we're not Norway, just in case you didn't notice, whatever. But then I guess I doubt the efficacy of a private group for the same reasons. Like, how will they ever get the credibility? It's sort of like the horse is so far out of the barn, to reuse somebody else's expression. I can't remember who said that already, but, it's sort of like maybe the horse will come back on its own someday. Like we're so out. We're so far out. And I tested myself the day after watching that movie. I sat down to work, and like my two social media outlets that I'm pretty regular on are Twitter and LinkedIn. And I don't use Facebook anymore. I deleted my account back at the beginning of, was it 2019 or 2020? I can't remember. 2020, I think. But I tried to say like, okay, until noon, I'm not going to look at any social media. And literally like my brain was just like pulling me over there, like every 10 minutes. It was like, it was incessant. And I was like, oh, Michael, you are hooked. So like, it's like I'm now like putting somewhere on my calendar. I'm like, I'm going to do a dopamine fast withdrawal. Like I'm going to like take my technology, stick it somewhere and go out in the wilderness for a week to try to come down off of the behaviors. Because so that's the part, Tim, I kind of say like, that's our human agency. Like to the extent possible, we try to do the things that will help our health. I agree with you. Not everybody's in a place where A, they understand the problem, B, have the capacity to do it, right? Much in the same way, like, you know, if I'd like to lose weight, I know I need to eat a better diet. I need to exercise more. Like those are pretty fundamental things. Not everybody's going to have the knowledge of that or the capability to do it. So not everybody's situation is the same.
I do think I've been approaching this situation from a personal responsibility perspective in terms of like, I'm going to do what I can do at my company to shape things to go in the right direction. And I'm going to do the things that I can do in my private life to shape my own behavior in the right direction. I feel like, yeah, that is like, I guess a big burden or whatever you want to call it, or a lot of responsibility. But like, even we were on holidays the other week and I always have my phone on silent, and my mum actually, it's let's say an amusing but scary story too. She ended up in hospital and I didn't have my phone on me for like 8 hours. And she's like, oh, well, you obviously don't give a shit about me because I've sent you a photo of me in hospital. And I'm like, oh, geez, like, Mom, come on. But, yeah. And I found that like people would start calling my husband to get a hold of me, which to be honest doesn't really bother me. But it's like you can put up these boundaries yourself, but then you feel like people come through with a sledgehammer and try and knock them down. And so I also try like to have hobbies that see me not using. I find I get to the end of the day and I don't want to look at a freaking computer. So all my hobbies are based around not being on technology.
So let's just note that there was the time that we had to contact Michelle, who contacted Jamie to get you because we had a little timing screw up on the podcast. So
that is true. Happen. That's true.
But Michael, to your so my son with ASD, with the program that he went through, that was a pretty common. There was a degree of you're in a wilderness program. He wasn't, but there were a lot of people in the program he wound up in where residential treatment, pretty intensive. You're in a living environment that's residential and there is no electronics and you're surrounded by other people who don't have electronics. And then one of the criteria to get your electronics, which is then pretty highly regulated as you progress through it, is that you actually do have to go through education. You actually have to understand what's going on with your brain and your neurology. Like, so you go to him now and he's got plenty of challenges, but he can say, yeah, I should not sit and play a game for more than an hour without getting up and doing some physical activity for at least 15 minutes. So some of that information is there and it can be educated. Unfortunately, the resources to do that at scale, when you have people saying, that's also a hell of a good babysitter. Give them the iPad and I can get my work done for 4 hours. So, but there is data and study and protocols that say, yeah, you can educate. You can educate that, help people develop the strategies, even kids, to use electronics in a healthy manner, but it does have to be deliberate. And that we have not gotten to at all. And you can't really legislate that. That would set things off for another reason. But that maybe gets us back to where the point of the social dilemma is, get people recognizing this is like a real issue. The next part is, okay, what do you do about it? Because they end with it's a dilemma. One of Michael's former coworkers, my current coworker, Jonathan, has done a lot of educating in his community around these are the things you can and should do. These are worksheets you can use to kind of come up with this plan. But I think that works for people who have the education, the knowledge, the bandwidth, the capacity to actually go through all of that, which unfortunately is going to lead to the generation that's going to come out better is going to be the same generation that was successful for the last 100 years. They were born into privilege of some sort. So we're back to being depressed.
Yeah, particularly with COVID and like, God, I mean, I feel for all the parents going through COVID, especially when daycares and schools are closed, and it's like, you do what you got to do so you can actually get your job done. And like even privileged families were in that situation. I just feel like it's freaking hard.
Yeah, no, I'm well past like any judgment of any parent ever. Like it's just Everybody's just trying to survive. I remember, this is a stupid story, but before Marie and I had any kids, we would sometimes visit friends and we would be driving home or whatever. We'd be like, when we have kids, we're going to put them to bed at this time and not let them like do this or that. Every single thing we ever said, we did not stick to, not even close. So like, I am past like, when you have, it's just all, and you got to do what you got to do. So no one should feel guilt, but it is, that's the part about this whole thing, Mo, and you kind of touched on it. It gives me the hope is sort of like what I can do and what I can help with locally. Like I can talk to my friends. I can help my kids understand dynamics online. I can do things to try to like not make it so such a focus in my own life. At the same time, globally, I sort of think then will we just be the same ones who see the world burning around us? And that's like what's going to happen. And so like this bigger picture, it is pretty depressing most days of sort of like, how do we solve this pretty big systemic problem that's causing like some pretty big havoc in at least society of the United States, I would say.
And one of the things I was chatting about with my good friend was also the idea that there needs to be a relationship between, places like the Center for Humane Technology and technologists who are working within these companies, because ultimately, like, they are going to be the driving force of asking the questions, pushing the product in a better direction. And I think we all, as people that work in this industry, can have a role to play in driving those conversations and being an ally, I guess. Like, because when you think about it, like the people who are in the social dilemma, they can't influence this stuff within companies anymore. They need partners within companies to work with them and to understand why this stuff matters.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is a great discussion, but we do have to start to wrap up. I'm glad we were able to solve the problem of the social dilemma.
Next episode, Die Hard with a Vengeance. No.
That's right. Next movie. Yeah. Hey, if you want us to review a film, please do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Anyways, one thing we do want to do is do a last.
We haven't done. Yeah. Would you recommend it to a family member or a friend? This is how I finished book club. You need to give it a score out of 10.
Oh, score out of 10. Mo, you're so right. That is a missing element. Would you like to lead off for us? Give it your recommendation and your rating.
I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 because I think it does do a good job of explaining some of the issues to the mass population. I took 1 point off because of their depiction of AI, which I felt could be misleading.
That's solid.
I feel like when you said that you and I were going to disagree on something, I had in my mind an 8.5, and for the exact same reason, I would recommend it and say, but please talk to me afterwards because I think their depiction of AI is begging to be overinterpreted.
Ooh, I can't believe we agreed.
And I'm going to give it an 8.76 because I wanted to try to find a different number than either of you. But at the same time, it is a movie I would recommend because of the awareness that it starts to create. And I think that awareness, at least that awareness, is super important. And I think, probably.
Oh, I just leveled up again. Oh, sorry.
Dopamine for Tim. No, the awareness that it creates is actually pretty important because that's the first step for a lot of people. And we got to do a better job. And I think the three of us, when we were talking about even doing this show, the fact we were sort of interested in it, I think bespeaks the fact that, this is something we are sort of have some awareness of, but sort of how do we go broader with this message? So anyway, appreciate.
You do realize by giving it an 8.76 or an 8.5, neither of you would recommend it based on an NPS scale because only a 9 or a 10.
Oh, we're not using NPS is bullshit.
Yeah, I'm a big NPS girl.
Okay, 9.2, Mo. Are you happy now? I do recommend it. I think people should watch it.
Well, I wouldn't be able to give it an 8.5, right? Because actually, technically, there is no 8.5. So I would have to give it, it would be a 9.
I was going to say, technically, you need to give it a whole number, but then you were on a tangent.
Then it would be a 9. Fine.
The scoring rubric was not explained well ahead of time. And for that, I apologize to our listeners because as a measurement-focused podcast, that's a miss on our part. Anyway, we need to do last calls. We love to go around the horn, share something that you should check out online, because now that that's, well, anyways, what's your last call, Mo?
It's a really funny one today, just given the topic we've been discussing. But I have an amazing analyst internally that's built basically a causal impact package for us all to use. So we're using like the one package whenever we do this type of analysis. And it also leverages the Profit package from Facebook, which is open source, which is available both in R and Python. Basically, it creates like a profit class, and then it fits and predicts different methods and models. So yeah, I don't know. I was reading up on that the last couple of weeks and found it really interesting, and just thought, if that's a problem that you're facing, I mean, I'm not smart enough to build the actual causal impact package like Kung, but I'm definitely a grateful user of what he's built. But it was just really interesting reading, and I guess it was kind of nice that Facebook have made it open source, given we've just spent an entire show slandering them. So
they're not all evil. It's a dichotomy.
It's a good one. Why don't you go next, Michael? You wind up.
Well, okay, I will. Thank you. So mine is something I actually got from my good friends and Tim's coworker, Stuart Schilling. And he showed me this, and I've sort of been fascinated with it over the last week or so. It's a mapping company that takes every 9 meters on the planet and associates 3 words with it.
Yep.
It's called What 3 Words.
Yep.
And basically their idea is that location is this sort of weird construct of like streets and city names and numbers. And that's not the right way for the brain to think about it. And so if you can remember 3 words, you can plug that into your phone and it'll take you right to that spot within 9 meters. And it's actually sort of like, as I thought about it, I was like, that's actually brilliant, like on so many levels. And then I was like looking up, like, where am I sitting right now? What 3 words am I sitting in? And I was like, can you change them? Could I like buy 3 words that fit my, anyways, it's a fascinating website, startup, something like that, what3words.com. With the 3 being the number 3. But thank you, Stu, for pointing that out. It's been kind of fun to think about and sort of just type in random 3-word groupings and see where it throws me in the world. It's kind of neat. What about you, Tim?
Well, I was going to have 2 podcast episode recommendations, but now it's going to be 3, because there was an episode called The Address Book of 99% Invisible, where they talk about addresses and the history of addresses. And they actually wind up towards the back end of that, talking about what 3 words and kind of where that fits and kind of what works and what doesn't work about what 3 words. So I kind of wonder if Stu heard about that through 99PI.
It's possible.
So that was podcast episode recommendation number 1. New podcast, which as of our recording, they only have 2 episodes, but I was going to recommend the first one anyway, is called Brave New Planet. It's a guy named Eric Lander, and they basically take big issues, big topics, and they kind of look at the benefits and the risks of them. And the first episode, which was the one that I was going to recommend, but the second episode's on climate change and it's pretty good too. But the first one is all about deep fakes. So they talk about GANs, they talk about GPT-3, and they kind of come at it from various different directions and do a really good job of explaining kind of the nuts and bolts of deep fakes. And then my third recommendation, because it also came up, was past guest, and she keeps cropping up, but Emily Oster, right? She's
oh my God, she does. I was going to talk about her today.
So
she's good.
And she had her, so she was on a recent episode of Planet Money where it's called Opening Schools and Other Hard Decisions. And she kind of outlines her kind of 5 things for making a decision, which she'd written about in the Atlantic. But then she talked through kind of the new project where she just started with Google Forms and just trying to collect data on schools. But I was just struck by, she's once again reminded how the thinking like an economist is just so amazing. But she was once again like delightful and brilliant. And so there's an episode of Planet Money called Opening Schools and Other Hard Decisions. So it's kind of broader applicability. And she is fantastic on that. So
she also has lots of links to articles about that in her newsletter, which I highly recommend subscribing to.
Yeah. And she sort of tells the story of her newsletter saying, hey, we didn't have any data on this, so I'll just stand up a Google form. And then that she quickly got stuff. And even if you watch her on Twitter now, it's just mind boggling. It maybe gets back to the social dilemma. There are people criticizing her for basically collecting data. And she's like, fine. Like, what, you got a better solution? Like, in a direct and somewhat humorous, but it is one where you're like, why, where are people getting this? That's where they need to spend their time. Let's criticize without any effort to come up with an alternative.
Yeah. Data used badly by somebody must be data collection is the problem of any kind. Right. So anyway, nice last calls, everybody. All right. You have probably been listening and thought, wow, this episode makes me want to like and subscribe. No, I'm just kidding. But we would love to hear from you. And there are ways in which we do that until we figure out a better path. We do have a Twitter account. We are on the Measure Slack and our LinkedIn group. And if you have thoughts about the movie or you'd like to share them or something resonated with you or you've got other ideas you'd like to share, we're always open for that. If you think there's other topics like this that you think we should go deeper into, we'd like that comment as well. We actually get from time to time some really great show topics from listeners. And so that's something we're really open to. I think that this episode is really interesting, but you know what else is interesting? Our producer, Josh Crowhurst, who we always want to remember to thank because he kind of makes this show come out on a regular timing basis. So the fact that you're listening right now means Josh did something nice for you and really nice for us. Okay, so if you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, it is a 9 out of 10 unanimous recommend by the Digital Analytics Power Hour, and we're kind of a big deal in data and analytics because we have Mo Kiss and Tim Wilson, the quintessential analyst. And so go watch the movie. You'll like it. If you don't have Netflix in your neck of the woods, then go download it illegally off the internet. I didn't say that. Just go use somebody else's login, but you should watch the movie if you get a chance. All right. I know I speak for my two co-hosts, Mo and Tim, when I say no matter how much dopamine you're using to get Twitter likes and YouTube followers, just remember, keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter or in the Measure Slack. We welcome your comments and questions. Visit us on the web at analyticshour.io or on Twitter at analyticshour.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
The initial introduction to what we're going to be discussing today. Tim, you have 2 minutes.
Your time starts now.
Intermission. We're going to listen to Tim and not interrupt. And then we're going to listen to Mo.
And then I'll go on for like 3 minutes and you can keep interrupting me. And I'll keep ignoring you. And then I think what you should do.
I'm speaking, Tim. I'm speaking.
Oh, shut up.
Is that a fly? Oh, gosh. Oh, come on, man.
Oh, come on, man.
Okay. The election is over as of this episode, so it's not over as of the day we're recording. All right. Are we ready?
Did you see the TikTok of the guy doing the KFC making it's like making gravy, and it's like they think, and it was written as like, oh, this was people was like disgusting or horrifying.
Here's words I thought I would never hear from Tim Wilson. Did you see the TikTok?
Rock, flag, and forest, pink, banks. That's what 3 words somewhere in Facebook's headquarters.